What's going on, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, guardians of all ages, Joker back again, once again. So, a lot of people have been wanting to know my opinion on the Raid Lairs. Since I did touch on them in my Avoid the Hype Curse of Osiris DLC video, I'm gonna go ahead and assume that you mean more of a general kind of concept way. I think it's a great concept. However, in true Bungie fashion, as of late at least, great concepts seldom see great execution. For example, the overarching plot of Destiny 2 just doesn't support raid lairs. If the entirety of Year 1 was just about fighting the Cabal, then yeah, you know what? More raid lairs. Have at it. But it's not, so it's a different story. I think there's an expectation, and it's not an unreasonable expectation, that the endgame content of a DLC or an update is thematically and narratively tied to the DLC or update it's released in. Destiny 1, for all intents and purposes, was a Vex game, and it had the Vault of Glass. Dark Below was a Hive DLC, and it had the Crota's End raid, which was tied to the story of the game, tied to the story of the DLC, and tied to the story of the greater cosmology of Destiny as a whole. It leads to the Taken King, which leads to Destiny 2, which will lead into whatever's going on with Savathûn in the DLC and expansions and updates and all that nonsense for years to come. House of Wolves was Fallen themed, and it had a very Fallen piece of endgame content with the Prison of Elders, which also tied back to the greater story as a whole with the Queen. I'm not saying that every piece of endgame content needs to be a huge expansive raid. I think we should have a huge swath of diverse endgame content for people to play. So something like a Horde mode would be more than fine. In fact, that's what I'm kind of hoping the Infinite Forest turns out to be. Now, while I could just rag on the story of Curse of Osiris without actually playing it, because I do understand what it would take to actually tell that story, and expecting the Rise of Iron story team lead, the lead that gave us such wonderful and memorable lines as,
I didn't even know someone with the Traveler's Gift could die. Until they did.
I think expecting this team to deliver on a solid Vex Osiris story in any capacity would be a big mistake. Destiny 2 didn't have the greatest story, and one would assume that was their A-team. Mind you, I make these videos hoping and praying I will be proven wrong, something I don't think a lot of people actually understand. But when the story is being told across 8 missions, 2 of which are strikes, and we've seen the first mission, so basically they have 5 missions to convey the Vex's master plan, time travel, and Osiris, which, by comparison, mind you, the Taken King was dealing with far more simplistic concepts and needed a huge expansion to tell that story, and a 50-page Oryx Hive origin story in the Grimoire just to convey what the hell was going on even remotely adequately, and even then, some people would debate how well that was actually done. So, to say that I have little faith for this story from things I've seen and read, and a basic understanding of how storytelling works on a fundamental level from years of creating concept art and storyboarding, would be an understatement. But I can still hope they get the gameplay right. The Infinite Forest being a quasi-Horde mode public event would go a long way to doing that. But back to the Raid Lairs. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I think there's an expectation, and not an unreasonable one, that the endgame content of a DLC is thematically and narratively tied to the DLC and update and game it's released in. This whole Raid Lair concept isn't a terrible idea on paper, but it robs players who were looking forward to a Vex or Rasputin piece of endgame content of those things. In fact, in a way, the marketing has been kind of underhanded. When Bungie has spent 3 years providing thematic endgame content to the DLCs, and you see Osiris and Rasputin, the natural presumption would be that this trend would continue. Thus, people were buying these season passes under the presumption that there would be Vex and Osiris and Rasputin endgame content. There's not. And I can honestly see how people would be upset about that. It's not like Bungie wasn't talking about the raid before the release of Destiny 2 And I think this is one of those pieces of information that should have been given out at that time. Then again, had they done that, more people probably wouldn't have bought the season passes because they made the natural assumption that these DLCs would follow the same content development that past DLCs have set a precedent for. If Bungie had been completely transparent, that would have been off the table. So, yeah, this was kind of underhanded. The Vault of Glass is revered as one of the best pieces of endgame content that Bungie has ever developed. And it's been 3 years since we last got a piece of Vex endgame content. Now, this Raid Lair could be a piece of Vex endgame content. Like the Vex have infiltrated the Leviathan and we must now go and clear them out. Sure, that's what I and any rational person hopes. That's just wishful thinking. There is nothing in the story as of now that presents that possibility, which means it would need to be presented in the Curse of Osiris, which would further take away from the already slim Osiris story, to talk about the Leviathan. Something that, outside of the raid and a really cool lore book, hasn't played that big of a role in Destiny 2's story at all, and that's kind of the problem. Let's go all the way back to Taken King for a moment. The Dreadnought was introduced, and not only did a large portion of the story take place on it, huge updates to the lore were based around it, and it was a patrol zone with different things to go and do and explore. A Raid Lair-like system would have worked spectacularly on the Dreadnought. The first 2 raids, you push through looking for Oryx and fight different challenges and champions. And in the last Raid Lair, you get King's Fall. Destiny 2's Leviathan seems like it's an attempt to go back and do just that. A godlike being shows up in our solar system with an ancient ship, and now we've got to fight our way through his ship, presumably to him, to fight him, to save the universe, or something. I say or something because Callus isn't the character Oryx was. He has currently very little importance to the story. Had the Leviathan never shown up, the Curse of Osiris and the Rasputin DLC would likely play out as is. Same goes for whatever Destiny 2's next expansion is, Destiny 2, The Taken King 2, Electric Boogaloo. Because the pieces of those stories have already been introduced for those expansions. The Leviathan, a very interesting idea, hasn't been tied to the story in any significant way. It's not a patrol area. We don't complete any of the story there, nor do we have any strikes on it. And there are 0 Grimoire entries for it because, well, some idiot thought it would be a great idea to remove the Grimoire instead of making it an in-game codex, like we'd been asking for since Destiny 1 Day 1. In all honesty, the Leviathan is nothing more than a glorified raid hub, just like this is the Crucible hub and this is the Strike hub. I think the reason the Raid Lair is getting so much backlash, and rightly so, is because the Cabal in Destiny 2 were nothing more than a plot device used to reset the status quo. By the end of Destiny 1, we were all-powerful gods with huge armories full of exotics like Galahorn, which was notoriously hard to develop around. And Bungie needed a justification for taking those things away from us, on top of introducing a story reason to why our powers were changed. But at the end of the day, that was the most significant contribution to the world of Destiny the Red War and the Cabal had. Yes, the Traveler woke up at the end of Destiny 2 to save us all, but that could have been done with any threat. For example, the Hive could have invaded Earth, destroyed the city, destroyed the tower, used the darkness to block our light from the Traveler. At that point, you don't even need to explain it because it's space magic. You could still have the speaker taken, only instead of Gull, you have some badass Hive Knight or Witch interrogating him. Or trying to corrupt him, trying to taint him, trying to turn him. That would have been way more interesting to watch. This Knight or Witch is trying to revive Oryx because Oryx is their god, or in the case of the Witch, maybe she's Crota's mother and Oryx's lover. It's really not important. What is the conquering of Earth, the taking of the city, of the Traveler, defeating Guardians, draining the light. This is all an act of war to describe Oryx, which we know from the Book of Sorrows is enough to revive a Hive god, even if they're killed in their throne. And at the end, the Traveler would wake up to kill Oryx as he manifested once again. In fact, you could literally just have us kill a knight, and then you could just have the Shadow of Oryx rise up, and he starts talking shit about how he's the apex predator, how he's immortal, how he's a god, how he's gonna destroy us and the Traveler, and all this other nonsense, and then the Traveler destroys him. You could literally use the same exact cutscene, only substitute a blob of light with a blob of darkness and make it look like Oryx. This story could basically play out the exact same way as Destiny 2's story did, and you would still have a significantly better story by changing the race that invades, because we are already invested in the Hive. The Hive are already established in lore. The Cabal, like I said before, started Destiny as big dumb war rhinos ruled by a guy who can't decide if he's cosplaying as Darth Vader or Bane, and they ended Destiny 2 as big dumb war rhinos ruled by Caligula, in large part thanks to the removal of the Grimoire, and whatever idiot decided that was a good idea. The point is, even as antagonists of Destiny 2, the Cabal were not, and still are not, fleshed out or established. And I think in many ways, that really gets to the heart of the reason why people have an issue of going back to the Leviathan. The Cabal just aren't interesting, like the Hive or the Vex are. People are looking at the DLCs and going, man, we could have gotten a really cool Vex or Rasputin piece of endgame content. But now we're just getting more Cabal. Wonderful. But like always, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, guardians of all ages, those are just my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below, and like always, stay frosty.